Hi guys, my name is Alex. I'm an architect in London, and in this video I want to share with you what it means to be an architect. So if you're curious about becoming an architect, or you're looking into switching careers, or you're generally just want to find out what architects do, then this video is for you. And I made this video because this is the sort of video that I wish I had before I was applying to universities, because there's a lot of ambiguity and a lot of things that they kind of don't tell you when you apply to universities. So I kind of wanted to cover those points to give a sense of realism as to what it means to be an architect. So this video is not intended to be like A to Z career progression sort of video. If you want to check out that sort of video, I actually made another video which I'll link up somewhere here above. But yeah, my plan with this was to basically give you a flavor of what architects do to see if this kind of career would be the right fit for you. So let's look at the purpose of architecture first. And if I had to describe what architects do, the definition I would use is that architects make complexity simple. And this is not the sort of definition that most architects would use when describing architecture. I think the prevailing one is that architecture is all about designing spaces. And whilst I kind of agree with that definition because it describes what we do in terms of designing, it doesn't actually tell us much about what we do on a daily basis. And I think making complexity simple describes the day-to-day process of architecture a bit more, because making even simple buildings is deceptively complicated. There's really a lot that's going on in architecture when a building is being designed. For example, there is the client relationship. You need to be able to talk with them effectively to understand what their requirements are, what their wish list versus their musts is. For example, you also need to understand the technical regulations and how to put things together, because you eventually need to translate your proposals to a workable set of drawings that the contractor can take and build a building. There's also statutory requirements. In UK, for example, you need to get planning permission and building control approval. Before starting the building process, you need to understand what the appropriate contract is so that you can advise the client correctly. But there's even deeper and more underlying issue that leads to complexity, which is that architecture is quite a weird profession. We need to be able to take a set of drawings, the proposals, and we need to be able to give them to contractor, and the contractor has to be able to build from those drawings. And it's a complicated process, because even if you have the best team possible, inevitably there will be mistakes. And the problem is that a lot of those mistakes are only apparent on site when the building is getting built. This is the kind of fundamental nature of the profession, because the amount of time that it takes to build a single building is beyond what normally any other profession would, spend on their project. And so you spend a lot of time and you have to constantly be thinking about predicting what's going to be happening in the future and where the potential mistakes can be. But on the flip side as well, this is where most of the fun is being able to see your creation being built on site and actually seeing, your clients using the building. It's, I guess, one of the most satisfying parts about becoming an architect. Okay, so the second part is the friction, and this problem is quite well documented in the architectural blogs and YouTube videos. And if you speak to anyone who has graduated architectural degree, they'll have the same story to tell, which is that architectural profession is much different from the education that we receive. So architectural education is quite artistic. There's a lot of design, there's a lot of conceptual thinking and solving problems. And then once you graduate and you are doing stuff in the real world, it's a completely different story. It's much more technical and much more skills-based environment, and a lot of students don't kind of appreciate that. And this is not to say it's a bad thing that you spend your university years being creative and then you translate into this more realistic environment. But the problem is that this point is not being emphasized a lot. So the expectations of the people that come from university and spend 2 years in practice to realize that this is not what they wanted to do, that sort of problem is quite real and is prevailing. So if you're in your early stages of career, or if you're just thinking of applying to do architecture, I think this is something to keep in mind, because design stuff is also being done in the real world, but it's not done to the same extent as it is in university, because the buildings are more realistic. You have a clear brief, you have a budget to work with, you have the client to work for, and typically the design design work is done by your boss, so it's not done by you necessarily. There might be some bits and pieces that you need to do when you do detailing. I don't know, for example, detail a gate or come up with a proposal for a parking or a small portion of the project. But typically the strategic moves are figured out by your boss. And so the majority of stuff that you do as an architect is either technical, admin, or it's communication. And technical is the things like, researching the building regulations or detailing, contacting suppliers and manufacturers to get the right product, for example. Communication might be sending emails, talking to consultants, engineers and other design professionals that work with architects. And then it's also talking to a contractor. And then finally, there's also a large chunk of the time spent on admin, like sorting through files and internal communications and things like meetings. So those are the things that majority of time is being spent on. There's a lot of learning to be gained in that process, which is being able to work in a team, learning from other people. And because it's a teamwork, there is the kind of pride and satisfaction that comes with designing a good quality project. And the good quality project is not necessarily only about the building, but it's actually that whole journey towards the end, towards the completion, which is the building. And it's that process that determines how well the final solution is going to be. So yeah, I think this duality of artistic university upbringings and the reality of profession, I just wish that those things were made a bit more explicit. So who is this profession for? Now, a good thing about architecture is that there is a little bit for everybody. Because it's such a complex field and such a vast profession that covers a lot of different areas of expertise, architects, they're generalists. And what it means is that you have to be good in a lot of different things to cover the complexity of the profession. But you can also look at it from the perspective of being a specialist among all those things that you need to be good at. And so you can pick and choose the specific things that you would like to be working on professionally. Now, there is generally kind of a spectrum of artistic people and technical people, and most people tend to fall in between of those two extremes on the spectrum. So I guess the first point is to, as you go through your education, or even before that, is to kind of figuring out what your interests are and what kind of person you are on that scale. Are you more artistic or are you a bit more technical? And I think once you figure that out, I think things should become a bit more easier in that you can position yourself in your education with a goal towards some kind of outcome. So for example, if you're a bit more technical and you are into environmental design, then perhaps sustainable architecture and green architecture would be a topic that's worth exploring for you. Alternatively, if you're into traditional architecture and you're excited about how things used to be built, there's a field of architecture that's called conservation architecture, so you might explore that. Alternatively, if you're more of an artistic type, then early stages of the projects are a good place to kind of try and position yourself, where a lot of visualizations and testing different design options is happening. So if you're that kind of person, if you're into creativity, perhaps the initial stages and less technical stuff is the right mix for you. Because yeah, I think the traditional notion of architect as a lone artist that designs and builds buildings is not strictly correct. Like, you can go out there and establish your office and start designing things for client, but that kind of romanticized notion of an artist architect sitting by his or her desk and designing buildings, it doesn't really work like that anymore these days, unless you either work for yourself or work for a very tiny practice. Most of the time you'll be working with other people and other professionals, and so being able to push for your personal agenda and for your specialization and the things that you want to be good at, I think is actually a good strategy, because it means that in that team of people you have a specific set of skills, and if the team is assembled well, then there will be other people that will have kind of complementary skills to yours, which will make this collaboration a bit more successful. For example, if you take the artistic person who is coming up with a concept, working together with a bit more technical person to deliver that building outcome, as a grand total of the effort put in, it will be a much more successful project compared to, if that building is delivered only by one of those two types of people. There's another video that I made that goes through the roadmap of becoming an architect in UK. So if that's something that you're interested in, becoming an architect, then I encourage you to check that video out. That video takes you through applying to university, going through initial stages of your education, taking internships, and then finally qualifying as an architect in a bit more detail. So if you would like to become an architect, I strongly encourage you to check that video out, and I'll see you on the other side.